We start, and before I introduce Leonardo Villalón, I'd just like to thank His Excellency Sheikh Nyang, the ambassador from Senegal to the United States and to other countries south of here, for coming. We're just delighted that he's here with his military attaché, the General Ka, who is an expert in Sahelian military affairs, and also Monsieur Jom, the DCM from the Senegalese embassy. I'd also like to point out some stars from the Keyork constellation. There is Jeannie Marisek, who is the chair of Keyork, and there is I. William Zartman, who's held just about every position we have, and who, of course, is an expert on North and West Africa. Let me say that it's a pleasure to have Leo Villalón here. He is an expert in the politics of West Africa. He has his PhD from the University of Texas. He is a professor at the University of Florida in African Studies and Politics. For 9 years, he was the director of that Title VI African Studies Center, and I think it's fair to say it is arguably the leading Title VI African Studies Center in the United States. Leo has spent a lot of time in the area he's going to talk about. He has been both a Fulbright scholar as well as a Carnegie scholar. He has a long history with us at Keyork. He was the president of the West African Research Association for, I believe, 8 years. And he is a walking testimony of why you shouldn't be nice to me. He came up to me 3 years ago in Dakar, our favorite city, and said, "Oh, I love Keyork. I'd really like to be more involved with it." At which point he became our treasurer. So be careful the time and effort and energy that you offer to Keyork, because we'll take you up. So Leo, we're really looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thanks. I have to say that I have a somewhat different memory of that conversation, but that my arm was twisted a bit more. But thank you. It's a real pleasure. Before I start, I think since this is, I believe, officially an event in part to commemorate Keyork's 30th anniversary, as an academic perspective, with a long association, but as an academic, I think I have to start with a word of sort of thanks to our sponsor. Thanks to Keyork and to the American Overseas Research Centers that Keyork represents. It really is an amazing job that they do, and most of us who work in the region stretching from West Africa across the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia to Southeast Asia, really are extremely indebted to the work that Keyork does on an incredible shoestring. So thanks to Keyork for everything. Those of you who know important people in this town, I encourage you to twist their arms to keep supporting Keyork. I'm both very, very pleased and a little bit sorry to be here today, I have to say, because of the difficult things we're going to talk about today. I've followed the Sahel for 25 years or so, and in fact for quite a few years I've given talks about the Sahel where my message has always been determinedly optimistic. I thought that despite the extraordinary challenges that the region faces, there was always much to point out as good news in that area. And that in fact, given the circumstances, the Sahel had a lot of lessons to teach some of the rest of the world. I'm afraid that some of that is still true, but that's not the message and that's not the aspect of the Sahel I'll be talking about today. Just 1 year ago, as the crisis in Libya unfolded and as Qaddafi was killed a year and 2 weeks ago, I believe or so, those of us following the Sahel were biting our fingernails with grave anxiety, worried about the consequences for the region, because it was very clear that there were possibly very negative consequences for the area. I think it's fair to say that none of us could have predicted the situation would be as bad as in fact it is. I keep saying that if someone had asked me to describe the worst case scenario in Mali on March 21st of this year, I would not have given as bad a prognosis as it is now, starting on March 22nd. We have really a worst case scenario. It's a situation that's changing, it's extremely complex, as much we still don't know about developments on the ground, and so I wasn't quite sure whom I'd be speaking to today, I propose to try to help to sort it out and to engage with some of the more complicated aspects of it, but also to introduce you a little bit to that area. And so I'd like to start, here's what I propose to do. I want to start with a few words to set the context, and the human dimension of this context I think is extremely important to sort of situate the Sahel for you and why the region matters. And then I'd like to describe a bit what happened. How did we get to this situation? What were the sequence of events that unfolded and led us to this very difficult situation we're in? And I'd like to then address a bit why I'm pessimistic, unfortunately, why I think that this is an extremely intractable, much more difficult situation than we had originally envisaged, and then perhaps suggest some possible things to be done, although honestly I can foreshadow it by saying I'm not sure I know or anyone knows really what to do next. Those are the big questions. So, to situate the context a little bit, I frequently talk about the fact that I work in what we frequently call the Francophone Sahel. That is the set of countries across this band stretching from Chad in the east to Senegal in the west that are former French colonies and hence have that name of Francophone. But if we look at another map of Africa, it's one I just happen to have, of Muslim Africa, where Islam in Africa is, we might also call it the Muslim Sahel. I think it would be fair to say. Islam is dominant across the region. Mauritania, of course, is effectively 100%. Senegal, Mali, and Niger, 95+% Muslim. Chad and Burkina Faso are majority Muslim, even though the Muslims are probably 60%. So in any case, it's also a very important part of the Muslim world, and that's not an irrelevant fact here at the moment. In fact, across the region, the fact of Islam is omnipresent, from the magnificent Mosque of Touba in Senegal to rural mosques in small villages in Niger, etc. The Sahel, of course, also refers to a climactic zone. I don't have a climactic map, but you can see it here. An ecological zone, the semi-arid area between the extension of the Sahara, right south, between North Africa and the forest belt of West Africa. And so my geographer colleagues always say the Sahel is actually only part of those countries, but the political term I'll use is the entire countries. In fact, the importance about that, of course, is that this is a zone of very fragile environments and very fragile conditions for many people. So you sort of see this is a typical scene of much of rural Mali, Niger, parts of Senegal, etc. In this case, it's people coming to a well for water, where a local village, plus as well nomads bringing both people and animals to a well where water is drawn by hand or with animal power. It faces the Sahel. You know, here's a nomadic family in Niger, traveling transhumants, moving with their animals, obviously, frequently in search of pasturage or food conditions, etc. So it's a fragile ecological area with where human existence and human conditions are precarious in and of themselves, even in the best of times, right? Despite it, of course, there's a lot of efforts, and so under difficult conditions, things went on and go on. Here's a school in rural Niger. Here's another reformed, sort of a semi-Franco-Arabic school in Niamey, in urban Niamey. And so you see the conditions are tough, with lots of kids in a small classroom, and nevertheless, as I like to say, the school teachers, who are always the heroes of West Africa, are in there in those classrooms teaching day to day with all of these kids. And so it's a point, my point I think here that I want to make is that it's a region of the world where in the best of circumstances there are challenges, enormous challenges, and life is difficult for many people. Obviously some variations, in Dakar and other urban areas it's somewhat different. The point is, for many of the population, much of the population, it's very difficult. In the best of times, when we have massive disruptions and dislocations like we have now, those conditions deteriorate very rapidly and very precipitously.